Chapter 7. The Grand Combinator. At 11:30, coming from the northwest, from the direction of the village of Marovka, a young man of about 28 entered the town of Stargorod. A stray kid ran after him. "Hey, mister," he shouted cheerfully, "give me 10 kopecks." The young man took a shiny apple from his pocket and offered it to the kid, but he wouldn't let up, so the pedestrian stopped, looked at the boy with irony, and exclaimed, "Maybe I should just give you the key to the apartment, where I keep all my money, too." The impudent kid realized the futility of his demands and immediately gave up. The young man was lying. He had no money, no apartment where it could be kept, and no key to unlock it. He didn't even have an overcoat. He entered the town wearing a green, narrow-waisted suit. His powerful neck was wrapped several times in an old wool scarf, and his feet were shod in patent leather boots with orange suede tops. He wore no socks. In his hand, the young man carried an astrolabe. "O Baedir Tyririm Tyrira," he sang as he approached the market square. Here he found plenty to do. He squeezed into the line of vendors hawking goods, held out the astrolabe, and began to shout in a serious voice. "Astrolabe for sale, cheap, special discounts for delegations and women's groups." Unexpected offer didn't generate any demand for a long time. Delegations of housewives were more interested in scarce goods and crowded around the fabric stalls. An agent from the Stargorod Criminal Investigation Department had already passed the astrolabe seller twice, but since the astrolabe didn't look anything like the typewriter that had been stolen from the oil center's office the day before, the agent stopped staring at the young man and moved on. Around lunchtime, the astrolabe was sold to an intellectual locksmith for 3 rubles. "It measures everything itself," the young man said, handing the astrolabe to the buyer, "if there's anything to measure, that is." Having gotten rid of the tricky instrument, the cheerful young man had lunch at the corner of Taste Cafeteria and went to explore the town. He walked down Sovietskaya Street, turned onto Krasnoarmskaya Street, formerly Bolshaya Pushkinskaya, crossed Kuprativnaya Street, and found himself back on Sovietskaya Street. But it wasn't the same Sovietskaya Street he had walked down before. There were 2 Sovietskaya streets in the town. Somewhat surprised by this circumstance, the young man ended up on Lenskik Event Street, formerly Denisovskaya, near a beautiful 2-story mansion at number 28, with a sign that read USSR, RSFSR, Second House of Social Security of Stargobstrak. The young man stopped to bum a light from the janitor, who was sitting on a stone bench by the gate. "Say, Pops," the young man asked, taking a drag, "are there any brides in this town?" The old janitor wasn't surprised in the least. "One man's trash is another man's treasure," he replied, readily engaging in conversation. "No further questions," the young man said quickly, and immediately asked a new question. "In a house like this and no brides?" "Our brides," the janitor countered, "have long been looking for them on the other side with lanterns. We have a state almshouse here. Old women live on full pensions." "I get it. These are the ones who were born before historical materialism." "That's right. Whenever they were born, that's when they were born." "And what was in this house before historical materialism?" "When was that?" "Back then, under the old regime." "Under the old regime, my master lived here." "A bourgeois." "You're the bourgeois." "He wasn't a bourgeois. He was the leader of the nobility." "A proletarian, then." "You're the proletarian. I told you, a later." The conversation with the clever janitor, who had a poor understanding of the class structure of society, would have continued for who knows how long if the young man hadn't taken matters into his own hands. "Listen, Grandpa," he said, "it wouldn't be bad to have a drink." "Well, treat me." For an hour, both disappeared, and when they returned, the janitor was already the young man's most loyal friend. "So I'll spend the night at your place," he said. "As far as I'm concerned, live here your whole life, as long as you're a good person." Having achieved his goal so quickly, the guest nimbly descended into the janitor's lodge, took off his orange boots, and stretched out on the bench, contemplating his plan of action for tomorrow. The young man's name was Ostap Bender. From his biography, he usually only shared one detail. "My father," he would say, "was a Turkish subject." The son of a Turkish subject had changed many occupations in his life. His lively character, which prevented him from dedicating himself to any one thing, constantly threw him to different parts of the country, and now had brought him to Stargorod without socks, without a key, without an apartment, and without money. Lying in the janitor's lodge, warm to the point of stinkiness, Ostap Bender was polishing in his mind 2 possible options for his career. He could become a polygamist and calmly move from town to town, dragging behind him a new suitcase with valuable things seized from the wife on duty. Or he could go to the Stardik Komissia, Children's Commission, tomorrow and offer to take on the distribution of a painting that hadn't been written yet but was brilliantly conceived. The Bolsheviks write a letter to Chamberlain, based on the popular painting by the artist Rapin. The Zaporozhian Cossacks write a letter to the Turkish Sultan. If successful, this option could bring in about 400 rubles. Both options had been conceived by Ostap during his last stay in Moscow. Polygamist option was born under the influence of a court report he had read in the evening newspaper, which clearly indicated that a certain polygamist had received only 2 years without strict isolation. Option number 2 was born in Bender's head when he reviewed in a KHRR, Association of Artists of the Revolution exhibition, with a complimentary ticket. However, both options had their drawbacks. Starting a career as a polygamist without a wonderful gray with green flecks suit was impossible. In addition, it was necessary to have at least 10 rubles for representation and seduction. Of course, it was possible to get married in the green suit, because Bender's male strength and beauty were completely irresistible to provincial margaritas of marriageable age, but that would be, as Ostap said, low class, not clean work. With the painting, too, not everything was smooth. There could be purely technical difficulties. Would it be convenient to draw Comrade Kalinin in a papaka and white burqa, and Comrade Chicherin naked to the waist? If necessary, of course, all the characters in the painting could be drawn in ordinary suits, but that wouldn't be the same. "It won't have that effect," Ostap said aloud. Then he noticed that the janitor had been talking about something heatedly for a long time. It turned out that the janitor was indulging in memories of the former owner of the house. Police chief paid him respect. You come to him, let's say, on New Year's with congratulations. He gives you 3 rubles. On Easter, let's say, another 3 rubles. Yes, let's say you congratulate him on his name day. Well, just from congratulations alone, you get about 15 rubles a year. He even promised to present me with a medal. He says, want my janitor to have a medal. That's what he said. You Tikhon, consider yourself already with a medal. Well, did they give it to you? Wait a minute, he says, don't need a janitor without a medal. He went to St. Petersburg for the medal. Well, the first time, let's say, it didn't work out. The gentlemen officials didn't want to. The Tsar, they say, has gone abroad. It's impossible right now. My master ordered me to wait. You, he says, Tikhon, wait, you won't be without a medal. And what did they whack your master? Ostap asked unexpectedly. No one whacked him. He left himself. What was he going to do here, sitting with the soldiers? And now they give medals for janitorial service. They do. I can get one for you. The janitor looked at Bender with respect. I can't be without a medal. That's my job. Where did your master go? Who knows? People said he went to Paris. White acacia, flowers of emigration. So he's an immigré. You're the immigré. People say he went to Paris, and they took the house for old women. You can congratulate them every day. You won't get a dime. He was a master. At that moment, a rusty bell jangled above the door. The janitor, groaning, shuffled to the door, opened it, and stepped back in utter confusion. On the top step stood Ippolit Matveyevich Vorobyaninov, black-mustached and black-haired. His eyes shone with pre-war brilliance under his pince-nez. Master, Tikhon mumbled passionately, from Paris. Ippolit Matveyevich, embarrassed by the presence of a stranger in the janitor's lodge, whose bare purple feet he had only just seen from behind the edge of the table, was flustered and wanted to run, but Ostap Bender jumped up quickly and bowed low before Ippolit Matveyevich. We may not have Paris here, but welcome to our humble abode. Hello, Tikhon, Ippolit Matveyevich was forced to say. I'm not from Paris at all. What put that in your head? But Ostap Bender, whose long, noble nose clearly smelled something cooking, didn't let the janitor utter a peep. I understand, he said, glancing sideways. You're not from Paris, of course. You came from Konotop to visit your late grandmother. Saying this, he gently embraced the bewildered janitor and pushed him out the door before he understood what had happened, and when he came to his senses, he could only figure out that the master had come from Paris, that he, Tikhon, had been kicked out of the janitor's lodge, and that he was clutching a paper ruble in his left hand. Looking at the paper, the janitor was so touched that he headed to the beer hall and ordered himself a couple of Gorshinov beers. Carefully locking the door behind the janitor, Bender turned to Vorobyaninov, who was still standing in the middle of the room, and said, Relax, everything's fine. My name is Bender. Maybe you've heard of me. Haven't heard of you, Ippolit Matveyevich replied nervously. Well, yeah, how would the name Ostap Bender be known in Paris? Is it warm in Paris now? Good city. My cousin is married there. She recently sent me a silk scarf in a registered letter. What nonsense, exclaimed Ippolit Matveyevich. What scarves? I didn't come from Paris but from... I understand, from Morshansk. Ippolit Matveyevich had never dealt with such a temperamental young man as Bender and felt simply ill. Well, you know, I'll go, he said. Where are you going? You have nowhere to rush. The GPU will come to you themselves. Ippolit Matveyevich couldn't find anything to say, unbuttoned his coat with the crumbling velvet collar, and sat down on the bench, looking at Bender with hostility. I don't understand you, he said in a fallen voice. That's not scary, you'll understand now, just a minute. Ostap put on his orange boots on his bare feet, walked around the room, and began. Which border did you cross? Polish, Finnish, Romanian? Must be an expensive pleasure. A friend of mine recently crossed the border. He lives in Slavuta on our side, and his wife's parents are in Lednyady on the other side. He quarreled with his wife over a family matter, and she, from a sensitive family, spat in his face and ran across the border to her parents. This friend sat alone for 3 days and sees things are bad. No dinner, the room is dirty, and he decided to make peace. He went out at night and went across the border to his father-in-law. Here, the border guards took him, sewed up a case, put him in jail for 6 months, and then expelled him from the trade union. Now they say his wife ran back, the fool, and her husband is sitting in the preliminary detention cell. She brings him packages. And did you also cross the Polish border? Honest to God, Ippolit Matveyevich blurted out, feeling an unexpected dependence on the talkative young man who had stood in his way to the diamonds. Honest to God, I'm a citizen of the RSFSR. In the end, I can show you my passport. With the modern development of printing in the West, printing a Soviet passport is such a trifle that it's ridiculous to talk about it. A friend of mine went so far as to print even dollars. And do you know how difficult it is to forge American dollars? The paper has such, multicolored hairs. You need a great knowledge of technology. He successfully sold them on the Moscow black market. Then it turned out that his grandfather, a well-known currency speculator, had bought them in Kiev and was completely ruined because the dollars were still fake. So you can also lose with your passport. Ippolit Matveyevich, angered that instead of energetically searching for diamonds, he was sitting in a stinky janitor's lodge and listening to the chatter of a young upstart about the dark deeds of his acquaintances, still couldn't bring himself to leave. He felt a strong timidity at the thought that the unknown young man would blab all over town that the former leader had arrived. Then, it's all over, and maybe they'll even put him in the GPU. You still don't tell anyone that you saw me, Ippolit Matveyevich said pleadingly. They might really think I'm an immigrant. That's it, that's ingenious. First of all, the asset. There's an immigrant who has returned to his hometown. Liability. He's afraid they'll take him to the GPU. But I've told you 1,000 times that I'm not an immigrant. Then who are you? Why did you come here? Well, I came from City N on business. What business? Well, on personal business. And after that, you say you're not an immigrant. A friend of mine also came. Here, Ippolit Matveyevich, driven to despair by the stories about Bender's acquaintances and seeing that he couldn't be knocked off his position, submitted. Okay, he said, I'll explain everything to you. In the end, it's difficult without an assistant, Ippolit Matveyevich thought, and he seems to be a big crook. Someone like that could be useful.